Well, welcome back to the XR Industry Leaders Podcast. I'm your host, Brad Scoggin, the CEO and co-founder of ArborXR, along with my co-founder and CMO, Will Stackable. And today we have maybe one of the most important episodes that we've done. We sit down with Mars Wrigley, and they're seeing some just outrageously exciting success with VR training. They've seen nearly a 50% increase in output, nearly a 50% decrease in training time, and saved almost $20 million in just a 7-month period. Today, we sit down with Josh McCreary and Lauren Rucker, who are leading up the training initiative and have done so in conjunction with one of our favorite ISVs, Futurus. Josh and Lauren, thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Yes.
I'd love to just jump straight in and maybe tell us a little bit about what was it that got Mars Wrigley first involved in VR technology?
Back in 2019, we really didn't have the need back then, but we were just curious about what we could do with VR. I wasn't part of the initial team that kind of looked into VR, but there was a team that looked just for safety training kind of purposes, just to kind of see what we could do. It was very small very small scale. That was when we first kind of dabbled our foot into the VR XR waters. Then fast forward a few years until we really went full force ahead with our VR trailblazing into 2022 is where we really made the decision that VR was something we could really use to build capabilities at a high speed manufacturing facility like we are.
Well, and what problem specifically were you aiming to solve?
So coming out of COVID, many manufacturing companies had similar issues, staffing being one. Consumer demand shot up a lot faster than we anticipated as a business. Our case fill rate, which is basically can we supply what the customer demands, it was at an all-time low. We aimed to be around 98% there. We were in the 60s, mid-60 range as a gum business, and we are the largest gum factory in North America. So we were in jeopardy of losing some of our top customers, being Walmart, and that's a big deal with a company of this size. So we had to make a decision. We had to do something outside the box. We had to onboard several hundred people over a short amount of time. There went a stretch of 10 years where we only hired 80 to 100 people over 10 years. We're talking about onboarding 200 machine operators that all run the same equipment in a 6 to 7 month period. So we're talking about classes or groups of coming in 50 at a time. And that was unheard of in the business. So we needed a way to upskill people at a faster rate because our case fill rate was so low. We had to keep as many trainers running the equipment that we had because we couldn't afford to shut down equipment. We can't afford to continue to drop on our case fill rate. We needed to come up with an idea. How can we upskill these people off the floor as much as possible? That way we can kind of start cut into the training time that it takes on the floor and also cut into the time that they spend one-on-one training with actual on-the-job trainer, what we call them here in the business. So that's where the VR kind of entered the conversation. So myself and a few other associates, we started thinking about how we could make this work with VR. We started contacting some companies. Futurus was one that we had worked with on the first project, so it made sense to reach back out to them, and Annie was great to us. So we started building in 2022. We made the decision. We think we could train classroom trainings up to 10 people at a time, off the floor, not shutting down equipment, keeping our equipment running as much as possible. So that's where the decision was made and the building began to happen.
And just to be clear, I think what you shared ahead of time is that the reduction in training was from 8 to 12 weeks down to 6 weeks. Is that right, Lauren?
Yeah, before our training plan would be that a new associate would be hired, they'd come in and they'd spend time with an OJT from anywhere from 8 to 12 weeks one-on-one. But when you're only onboarding 80 people in 10 years, you can do that one-on-one type training for a long period of time, and the business is sustained. But before the pandemic, our average tenure of our associates was about 20 something years. And since the pandemic, the average tenure of our associates is about 6 years right now, because we just had such a high turnover during that time. So when we onboarded, Josh mentioned, we onboarded over 400 people in 1 year, and 200 of them were in our stick packaging area, which is the area that Josh is the training coordinator over. So this was a huge problem with how do we onboard this many people at the same time. If you've ever been on a manufacturing floor, it is very, very loud. And how do you have people ask questions and everybody look at these small pieces of this machine that you're running when you're trying to look over somebody's shoulder and the machine's not stopping for you to look at it? There is an operator there running it, because we have to get cases out the door to get that case fill rate up. So it was a really big issue.
So fascinating. So you're moving from this world where it's a 12-week training process. I'm guessing OJT is on the job training. I should know that, but okay. So somebody is there with you on this very noisy line, teaching you hands-on, one-on-one. All of a sudden, overnight, you have this massive influx of new employees to train. What are they actually doing in VR when they put that headset on? How are you moving the training that was that one-to-one model to a VR classroom, I guess, with a dozen or more employees going through it at the same time?
Yeah, it's really about just knowledge and being comfortable. Like Lauren said, it's loud on the floor. You can't hear. There's no way you could train 10 people at a time. Everybody's line of sight would be interrupted. Only certain people would be able to see. Within the VR, you're able to give everybody that ideal training site. If you're wanting to learn about a piece of equipment on the line, they can walk up and look at it. You eliminate the safety hazards with it. It gives them a little more. In the past, we would train a lot with just a handbook. You go through, read a book. It's more interactive. It's more engaging. For a fact, because we can actually watch with the iPad companion app. You can see where they're actually visually looking and make sure they understand things. So that's how we started to reduce the learning curve, is by preparing them as much as possible off the floor before they go on the floor. You could have one trainer lead a session for 10 people off the floor for maybe 2 hours worth of VR training, could save a week worth of training that you have to do on the floor.
Yeah, so we call it our familiarization sim. So every associate that's going to be in that area, that's going to be the first VR that they do. When I onboarded with Mars Wrigley as the training lead, Josh put me through the simulation. It was awesome. And I definitely felt like I learned a lot. So basically we have 3 larger pieces of machinery that a stick wrapping operator is responsible. One that wraps the gum in the foil and stacks it, one that packs it all into the envelope, and one that packs multiple envelopes into a tray so that it can be there on the counter waiting for you to buy it, at the store. And so the familiarization app will take and point out our key components that they need to know and make sure that they know the name, the function, and some common HMI error codes. So HMI is just our screen that basically shows like when an alarm goes off, what's wrong. And so here are some common error codes that you're going to have in this area. And so by giving them that opportunity to learn about the equipment at a slower pace, where they can ask questions, where they can not be as overstimulated by just how loud it is and how minty it is. There's a strong mint smell, which is delightful, but we just want to make sure they can learn as well as possible. And the VR provides a great environment for that.
I think that is a very unique challenge that you get to put on, how VR has impacted you is avoiding the distraction of the mintiness. But it sounds like you're not taking up time on the floor. Your people are getting through the training. I mean, they're more focused. They're getting through the training almost 50% faster. But another stat you had shared was that the output is also improving. And so the fill rate's gone up almost 50%. How are the trainees respond? I mean, are they enjoying the training? Do they feel and see the difference between maybe traditional training?
Yeah. So I did create like a post survey for all the trainees that go through. We've got good feedback. They do like, especially the younger generation. So as we move forward, and more should apply to this generation that grew up with a phone in their hand. The seniors at first were a little, they didn't really receive it as well. Well, I don't need this VR stuff. I need my hand with a tool. But as you get them to actually put it on and try it, they're really blown away by how accurate it is and how we can use this as a learning tool. So it's been great. We've got great feedback. What I have found that's been very interesting is the ones that really succeed, because we have other apps or simulations we can talk about that we've built on since then. The ones that succeed in VR are kind of succeeding on the floor at a higher rate as well. The ones that get through it, it's almost, can they pay attention to instructions? And a lot of that correlates with how they perform on the floor. Do they listen to direction? Can they follow instruction? Can they self-learn things? And it's really kind of, can they troubleshoot inside of VR? And it applies on the floor. So that's been an interesting learning to see that the ones that have succeeded and done really well and moved through the VR training really quickly are some of our upper echelon of operators on the actually factory floor.
Yeah, and Brad, sorry, y'all mentioned the case fill rate going up, right? And part of that is because with our shortened time and with our associates being able to be off the floor for that training, that are on the job trainers who are always our best operators, they can run that machine so well. It means they are not having to be off the floor, or their machine is running at full capacity, full speed, because that machine is running without a trainee with our best operator still. And so we saw a 45% increase in the output of our OJTs in that time period. And then an 18% increase for our on average for our trainee output compared to when they were on our previous training program. So Josh can probably speak to a little bit more about what that looks like, but we saw a tremendous increase in our case fill rate simply by being able to keep our OJTs doing what they do best, and then having them come in and train our associates for the part that we really need them to.
I think a lot of that's attributed to creating the standard and actually applying it to everyone. Because like Lauren said in the past, you're 12 weeks with a one individual one-on-one trainer. Now everybody may know a way of doing things, but they're going to tweak it their own way. So as you start to roll that out over time, you get several different ways of training. Now with the VR, you have a standard that everybody goes through and sees the same thing. They know what the standards are. They know what is expected. They know what does this and that. And it seemed like that's helped with this new wave of operators really have a higher output from the get-go.
This is fantastic. This is the perfect setup for VR. One of the questions we often get asked is, why VR, right? Could you have done this with a more traditional training method? Could you created videos to explain it so that your people could be on the line working? And talk about a little bit about why did you decide to use VR? Did you look at other traditional methods? How did you land here?
I would say that there was always possibilities of doing it other ways, but I don't think we would have saved what we did going other routes. Videos are one thing, but still, I don't think it's an interactive. I think the interactiveness, I think there's been studies in schools even that kids don't learn through textbooks anymore. That's just, you look at the world around us as it evolves. YouTube, TikTok, the attention span of kids, these newer generations of workers, it's not the same. They need that engaging interactiveness to really, for it to soak in. And there's been some studies with VR that I've kind of looked into about the retainability of training and how much more it helps to be interactive. So I think that was some of the things we talked about at the beginning. Our company, Mars, is actually on a plan for Digital 30, which is by 2030, we want to have digital twins for a lot of our equipment. So with our company leaning into the XR industry, it made sense for us to go ahead and start blazing a trail because I was big on it. Personally, they had my vote from day one. I'm a gamer, so I had my own VR at home. So I was like, yes, this sounds interesting. It sounds fun. I think we could do a lot of things with it. I think we're just barely scratching the surface on the capabilities of VR training.
And to provide a slightly different perspective, when you're looking at teaching someone, so my former profession is an actual teacher in the classroom. And when you look at research around how to teach people, right? Most people have heard about different learning styles, right? Oh, I'm a visual learner, I'm an auditory learner, things like that. Videos take care of that visual and auditory component, but the VR also adds in the kinesthetic, that I'm actually doing something. My body is moving. I'm holding the controllers. I'm involved, even if I'm not touching a machine. And when you look at like learning retention, if somebody hears something, I think the research is like they're like, a month from now, they're 10% likely to remember it, right? And if they write it down, then that increases. And if they read it, they hear it, and they write it down, it adds on to it. But where you really see the biggest gains in memory retention, as far as like teaching, is when the trainees are actually doing something. And then the biggest component is when you can then teach it yourself, right? Because you don't learn something as well as when you have to teach it and explain it to somebody else. So one of the great things that Josh has been doing is we have a lot of production coordinators who are responsible for training their specific team and making sure they get upskilled. And so Josh is upskilling them in the VR, right? Josh, we have 1,200 associates at our site. Josh cannot put every single associate through VR and be the only person who knows how to work our VR. That is not sustainable, right? So he got it off the ground and has done such a great job with that. But he's upskilling our production coordinators who are then able to teach the VR component of it as well to the new hires who are going to be on their team. And it provides just such a better retention, not only for our production coordinators, but also for our new associates who are coming in. They're doing it, they're participating, and then they actually, I think that the VR combined with then going out and actually seeing the equipment, we have some really fun pictures that we like to do when we're presenting out inside the business or things like that, of the side by side of the our wrapping machine in VR and our wrapping machine in person, and it is so accurate. It is so cool. And Josh has people. Mars Wrigley is a global site or a global company. And so Josh has had people calling from England. We've talked to people in Poland. We're talking to people across the US. Like, I think one time we had a meeting between Futurus, ourselves, other Mars associates, where we were trying to figure out, okay, what time are we going to meet? Because there are people in Vancouver, Atlanta, Chicago, and Germany. This is going to be a fun time zone. It's just like really cool to see the way it's gone out, because we know that this retention can really help, like of retention of associates, but also retention of their learning. And you're not having to go back and retrain because they've forgotten. We want them to train and learn well the first time as much as possible.
Speaking of retention, you talked a little bit about how this is just a much more engaging way to learn. And I think it's significant. If you're an employee starting out at a new job, 12 weeks is a long time to go through training. If you can cut that in half, imagine that makes a huge impact. So talk a little bit about retention and just how either stats or anecdotally, what employees have shared about this new type of training.
Speaking of retention, Our retention did increase by up to around 10% since we've implemented VR training. So that's been a bonus. The trainers aspect side of things, they're getting trainees now that are better prepared when they get there. The trainees are excited about VR. Once they hear about VR, you can see the look on their faces, and the 60 to 70% of the factory that doesn't get to go through VR, they're very jealous of the stick packaging group. When are we going through VR? So you could kind of feel the excitement from the ones that do get to experience it. Has definitely brought that excitement back to a training plan. And that's what we want. We want people to be excited about a new role. We want them to be engaged, want to come to work. Not only retention being an issue, but just attendance was an issue we had. And that's a lot of companies. But if we can get people excited about coming to work and training, that's the best thing we can do. And if VR is going to help us do that, then I'm all on board for that.
Yeah, and I think it shows like our associates that we care about their onboarding experience, that we want them to learn and have an enjoyable training time, and that we're willing to invest in them. You know, like we're not just investing in technology for the sake of technology. I mean, VR is great and it's very fun, but that's not why. You know, we're not doing it just because VR is fun. We're doing it because it's effective, because it can really impact their training, and because we want to invest in our associates. And that is, I think, invaluable.
Yeah, I totally agree. We talk about that a lot. I think what's most exciting about what's happening in VR is not that it's a new novel technology, but that there's real value at the core of it. And you guys are seeing that firsthand. I would love to hear more about, we talked in the opening, a benefit over a 7-month period of nearly $20 million. So maybe break that down for us a little bit.
20 million. So how we get to that? So you take a traditional 12-week training program. You have an OJT paired with a trainee. We have an average of what each machine output would be over that 12 weeks. Typically 30 to 40% lower than just a normal operator without a trainee. So you get that average over 12 weeks. Now we're cutting that training down to 6 to 8 weeks. Our plan was 6 weeks. We had a couple of trainees that stretched just for other reasons. So you've cut that in half. So we're able to save a lot there. We save on your percentage run. So we call it TRS. It's a percentage of how effective our equipment is over a course of a day. So you're able to increase that average over that 6-week period you cut out. Then you tie in on top of that your trainees are coming out 18% higher averages than were in the past. Accumulating all these numbers over 200 trainees over 7 months, you can make a lot of savings in the gum industry in a little bit of time. We make a lot of gum, 1 million sticks a day.
Can stretch from Miami to Anchorage, Alaska.
That's amazing.
Yeah, so it adds up really quick.
It does. It was an increase in over 200,000 cases of output. So when you look at that 200,000 cases of output, our distribution team, they know they have custom. They're like, yes, give us all the gum. We cannot make enough gum to, our marketing team is always like, oh, you made too much? Great, we'll sell it. Like we have that much demand for our product right now that we can't make too much gum. That does not exist right now for us. And so having that additional 200,000 cases output, and, you know, with the average output of our associates for the trainees increasing slightly, you know, and it only gets better the longer they're on their own, kind of getting into it. You know, we can't wait for our associates to be fully ready a year after they start, right? We need them to be more efficient sooner. And so it's been really exciting to see how that has impacted that 19 million.
Wow, what a stat. So 200,000 increase in cases in 7 months. Yeah, $19 million impact for the business. The question that I'm sure everybody listening right now has is, well, okay, what's the relative cost to develop a program like this? It seems like a no-brainer if that's the kind of impact. But could you talk a little bit about, what went into the cost of this program? And is there an initial outlay and then it gets cheaper over time? How does the economics of that work?
So for the cost of VR, it depends on what type of VR you're going to go for, right? You can get VR that's like off the shelf, where a company has already created it and you have to pay a certain amount each year or by associate, that sort of thing. But what we love about what we did with Futurus is there wasn't a fairly substantial initial cost to this. But one, we had a great need for it. We said our plant director at the time, Matt Aarons, was very supportive of VR and said, hey, we can't afford to not change something, so we had a great business case for it. And we had over 200 associates who were going to be running these 3 sets of machines. So there was a great business case for it. It's not financially wise to choose to make a VR for a piece of equipment that only 2 people are going to touch, right? It doesn't make sense. So one of the things that we've done is with our equipment, because all of our stick packaging machines currently are Mars Wrigley owned and engineered and manufactured, we did not actually have CAD drawings available to us. And so Futurist came out and did 3D scans of all of our equipment, which is what they typically have to do with older equipment that we don't have access to those drawings for. And they did all the 3D scans, did all of that. So it was initially quite a bit. But as we go on, we own it. We don't have to pay an ongoing fee to access this VR. So the more associates we train through it, the lower and lower the cost per associate is. We also have another site in Yorkville, Illinois, that also has our same gum wrapping machines. They wrap sugar gum instead of sugar-free. And so they have also been able to piggyback all of that off of that, because since the business owns it, hey, y'all have the same equipment. They had to buy hardware, but they didn't have to buy the VR simulation because we already owned it and we could give it to them and say, you didn't have to pay anything. So that adds even more associates, that brings that dollar value down. And we, because Yorkville has seen such great value with the VR as well, they have a new line coming in and they're looking to do VR with it. And we're also kind of experiencing like, hey, how did you get this business case? How did you get this approved? It's a lot of money. And what we gave them suggestions for is, hey, we have 40 of these machines. That's why it's a good test case for us. We have 40 of the exact same pieces of equipment. There aren't a ton of manufacturing sites that have that, but we have so many sites in the US and globally that they can say, hey, you know what? We have some of the same equipment that we do at our site in Topeka and our site in Waco, Texas, and we can split the cost across all 3 sites and combine, train associates in all 3 places. And then that is how we can also help drive down that cost per associate. And so depending on whether or not you do a customized VR that you own permanently versus, getting one that's maybe not customized specifically to you, which a lot of times those are like the safety ones. Josh and I have been talking with Futurist and Annie quite a bit because they have we're looking into how we can do this more with like forklifts and safety VR, because we have a lot of forklifts here at our site and we have a lot of forklifts at all of our sites globally. And so we think that could be a good test case for us.
You teed me up it's a great question. So we get this question all the time from customers and from people who listen to the pod. What's the value of working with an experienced ISV like Futurist? And is there anything specific they brought to the table where in hindsight you thought, well, that's something we just wouldn't have even considered if we hadn't worked with somebody who's as experienced as they are?
Josh, I know that you worked with Futurist a lot, mostly at the beginning. We have done VR with another company as well as part of a launch to new equipment. It was actually provided by the vendor. And I would say that we did see when you're working with someone who's new to VR, there's just a difference in working out some of those spots that come along where you're like, oh, this isn't working out. This isn't working out. Having it work across a variety of hardware, with Futurist, they're like, hey, we can make this work for Pico headset or Oculus, or, you have a little bit more variety.
Being able to schedule meetings weekly, collaborate, work on a Confluence work page together to build these programs. Of course, I didn't know everything in the building of VR, so they offered a lot of advice based off some of the other sims they'd built before for other companies. And there's a lot of back and forth about testing the alpha, the beta, making sure we have everything the way it needs to look, a lot of testing with actual employees on the floor, getting their feedback as we build it. So it's a collaborative effort. I think some of the unique things they offered just around the spacing of things, the pop-ups within the VR, the controller actions that I never would have thought of is where it was helpful as far as building an effective training simulation.
When we had the customization and that back and forth feedback with Futurist, I will say was one of the biggest differences between working with Futurist and working with a company who is providing VR for the machinery that we had contracted to bring into the site. Is we got to have, every week we are having meetings with Futurists, giving them feedback. They would send us stuff. We'd look at it, we'd test it, send them back feedback. It was that continuous loop. Whereas with this other company, they said, okay, we're going to build VR, and this is the kind of the simulate. We're going to do familiarization. We're going to do this. We're going to do that. We'll have 3 separate ones. And then I was like, okay, great. And then we didn't know anything really about it. We maybe had 1 feedback session, and then we received it, So I really appreciate being able to give that ongoing feedback to customize it the way exactly what we needed for our business.
Yeah, that's great to hear. We've had a lot of good experience with Futurist as well. We've talked a lot in most of this time so far about all the benefits. I'd love to just spend a minute or two on some of the challenges of deploying XR in this environment, and hopefully how Arbor has helped you solve some of those challenges.
Yeah, some of the challenges on the training side of things is just getting the buy-in from the senior associates that we want to put through, some of the senior new hires that we want to, they're not even, I guess, tech savvy to get the buy-in to the VR. So that even though they push back some, once they give in and actually give it a whirl, they've really enjoyed it. And we've got a lot of the better feedback from those people. Challenges with VR training, you're going to have people that get nauseous. So that was something with an obstacle, I'd say it was less than 5% that we've had to think of other ways. Fortunately, we developed the companion app on the iPads where you can follow along on an iPad. So that was basically our solution for that. If you can't go in the VR because of getting nauseous, we're going to let you go and follow through with the iPad and watch along. Another challenge I would say in the training end was just skill level. So what skill level do we put somebody after going through a simulation? We have 3 skill levels within our business. 1 skill level being nothing of the training at all. 2 meaning you have the knowledge to do of the training. What is this task that you now have the knowledge if you're a level 2? A level 3 means you can perform the task on the floor efficiently. You can actually have the skill. At first, we were building a lot of things, trying to get that level 3 skill with VR. Hey, if they can pass this in the simulation, they're a level 3. That means they can do it on the floor. That's not the case. There's still a physical aspect to the job. There's still a skill validation that has to happen physically on the job. We have to verify and validate on the floor. But the knowledge level, the level 2, that's what you're after with the VR. If you can move somebody from a 1 to a 2 and kind of reduce the training timeline to get from a 2 to a 3, that's the goal that we've kind of figured out. At first, we were going after a 3, trying to get somebody completely up to skill, all with VR. You can do a good bit, but that final piece, we figured out that there still has to be the on-the-floor validation portion. It just drastically reduces the time to move from a 1 to a 3 skill level. Arbor, y'all have been tremendous in helping update. We talked about the continuous updates, the back and forth with Futurus, constantly updating from a alpha to a beta build to a gold build, which we actually roll out for training. After seeing the other VR platform that we've been working with, is night and day difference. As far as getting uploads, our other VRs, you have to have a mega computer to plug them into, hardwire everything in, manually upload things. Y'all's platform has been a game changer, especially when you have 20 headsets like we do here. If you need to upload a change to a simulation, it makes it seamless. So I appreciate that.
Yes, agreed. Having to have a dedicated computer for each headset is not ideal. So we love y'all's platform being able to push out updates. But speaking of pushing up updates, one of the challenges that if you're considering, bringing VR to your company, to your manufacturing site, what have you, is you need to think about your internet and having we actually have a separate network that our VR headsets and iPads are on, because we just have so much technology on the site with all of the iPads and computers and things like that, that you really have to have considered your internet capabilities and the space. So VR, we love, it gives you like a little boundary so that if you walk past that boundary, you are all of a sudden seeing in real life again. So you're not going to accidentally run into somebody or whatnot. But you do actually, in order to train 10 people, you have to have enough space for 10 people to physically spread out in a room. So you do have to consider some sort of meeting space, classroom space. You're not really going to be outside for this. So finding that indoor space that is large enough to host a number of associates you're trying to do is also an important thing to think about, especially when you're scheduling, because if everybody needs the super large room for a big meeting, somebody's going to get priority. So you better book your room early. So.
Yeah, that's really good. I think there are some of the logistics and even the change management, like you talked about, Josh, that I think sometimes we don't think about, and they're just so key. This has been really, really good. Maybe as we move to a wrap here, just kind of a quick lightning question for each of you. Maybe one piece of advice. Another company that's thinking about getting started. What would each of you tell them?
I would say be thorough, list your goals. What is your goal from the beginning? What are you trying to change? What skill are you trying to change? Make sure that you can spread the wealth. Like Lawrence talked about earlier, it doesn't really make sense. The ROI is not big enough on a singular piece of equipment. But if it's something within a business that you can spread to multiple sites, or that's where I think you get the most bang for your buck. We've proven that it is capable of building capabilities. So I think you should just put in the work and start blazing your trail.
Yeah, and I think I would probably, similarly to Josh, tell them to really think about their case scenario. Like what is their business case for it? What associates are you trying to target? How many of them do you have? How many pieces of equipment, or what types of, are you trying to create a simulation because it's difficult to replicate on a regular basis? Maybe it's something that only happens once or twice, but when it does happen, it's a huge deal, right? So really think about the test case scenario, and is it either going to affect a lot of associates, or the task that you're trying to target has, its own financial component to it, right? If this goes wrong, is it going to cost your business a lot of money, right? One of the things we didn't mention is in our wrapping machine, there's a high speed section that if that is not properly taken care of, it costs $30,000 to replace. So one of our simulations is on our clean, inspect, lubricate parts that they do twice a shift, right? They clean the machine, they inspect all of the parts, they lubricate. If they do not lubricate that high speed section, we are going to be replacing a $30,000 part. So when you think about the cost of VR versus, hey, let's make sure we're trained well and our associates are meeting that same standard over and over again, so that we can reduce the maintenance costs, right? So there's lots of different ways to think about what you're going to be saving, right? For us in this project, it was case output. We needed our training time to be shorter. We needed that case output, but it also has all these other side benefits as well when you think about maintenance reduction, because the machines are being more well maintained. So there's a lot to really consider when you look at that case scenario that I would really dive into.
Yeah, that's so good. Guys, this has been awesome. Awesome. Thank you so much for your time. Know you're busy. And I want to end with what Josh said. I think it's the perfect way to end the episode. He said, put in the work and start blazing your trail. So look forward to talking to you guys again soon.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Man, what a fun interview. To me, it's wild. I feel like they didn't even fully get into it, but all of the kind of the ancillary benefits when people train faster, there's just this ripple effect to other parts of the business, and productivity increases in a lot of places.
It's true. And one of the things that she talked about, I think, well, they both talked about, that was so interesting to me was just the reality of being an on-the-job trainer, and you show up to work and all day you're basically going to be training somebody, trying to yell on the line when it's so noisy. The trainee, it can't hardly hear you. That's not a great experience for anybody. And you can imagine going from that to that trainer gets to be on the line doing his job, and then they get to come in where they feel like they add the most value at the very end to sign off and to make sure that that trainee is ready to go. And that whole early stage of the learning process, which is so difficult to do, all of a sudden just becomes effortless. And they talked about even that their initial hypothesis was they were going to be able to get people to a level 3. And going through this program, they've realized, okay, there is still a role for the person, the trainer. We can't get them all the way there, but we can fast forward 6 weeks and get them there so much faster, so that then the trainer can come in and do the high value thing at the end. So to me, just a great example of technology making people's lives better, giving them their time back. I know that's something that we talk about so often, but when we started Arbor, our mission was, how can this technology give us our time back so that we can spend more time with people in the real world? And I think VR right now, we're seeing with Mars Wrigley, is not taking jobs away. It's making it possible for new employees to train faster, for the on-the-job trainers to do their job better, and for everybody to just be productive instead of, wasting their time yelling at each other on the shop floor. So great story. I would love to get them back. And this is one we're going to return to, I'm sure.
Yep, definitely. Well, as always, thanks for spending a little bit of time with us. We appreciate it. Make sure you check us out wherever you listen to podcasts, and we will catch you next time.